Dear students, today I'll be discussing on the issues and challenges the Indian press encountered and the various measures the government had implemented for its growth during the post-independent India under the title Growth of Press in an Independent India. Immediately, with India attaining its independence from British rule, all the persecutions of the press inflicted upon by the colonial government on the Indian press came to an end. Consequently, the growth which was essentially necessitated was increased gradually, mainly due to the absence of restrictions and also the government considering it as an agent of change. Independent India made few major changes towards developing the press in India. Changes that was witnessed during the post-independent India. Number one, freedom from clutches of British laws. In March 1947, Press Inquiry Committee was established to analyze the various existing laws and regulations and to modulate them in accordance with the fundamental rights proposed by the Constituent Assembly. Press Inquiry Committee 1947. The committee recommended repealing the Indian Emergency Powers Act of 1931, modification in section 124A and 153A of the Indian Penal Code, amendment to the Press and Restrictions of Books Act. The Constitution freed the press from the clauses of British laws restricting the right to vent their grievances and dissents against the government and governmental functionaries on various issues pertaining to the matter of people's welfare. Second, constitutional provisions guaranteed the press freedom. The Indian Constitution facilitated the press with its provisions of freedom of press and speech and expression, with the Constitution of India securing the freedom of press under Article 19(1)(a), which essentially speaks of freedom of speech and expression and had ensured the freedom of the press with reasonable restrictions. Number 3, increased supply of newsprint. Newsprint is one of the most essential component in the process of newspaper production. Without it, printing is impossible. The British government in India had curtailed the circulation of newsprint throughout their stay in India. Whereas during the post-independent India, the circulation of newsprint had been increased to facilitate its growth. Now, limitations to growth. Despite the removal of various colonial restrictions on print media, there were several limitations to growth for the newspapers in India. Although those limitations have mostly been overcome after many years of independence, but they did delay the required growth. Due to all such limitations, the Indian press was lacking behind to meet the target of growth set by the UNESCO. Number 1, expensive machinery. The sophisticated machinery required for the mass production of print publications was to be imported from outside India. The cost of machinery was high and the Indian publishers found it to be unaffordable. They had to rely on outdated and slow machines for its production, which could not be matched with the modern machinery. As a result, this hindered the growth and expansion it required. Number 2, limited circulation. The issue of circulation has been a major hindrance to the growth of the print media and it's a most essential factor for their survival. The circulation of newspapers depend on various factors, for instance, its contents, targeted audience, and most importantly, the lack of literacy and the issue of poverty. The two major factors that had stood against the growth of newspapers during the immediate post-independent India was illiteracy and poverty. The illiteracy. Due to the huge illiteracy in the country, the circulation of newspapers were minimal. As a result of extreme poverty, people were concentrated on making efforts to meet the other daily needs. They could not afford to buy newspapers. Economic hardships are a result of unemployment, low agriculture production, etc. Number 3 is insufficient connectivity. The infrastructure required in India for its rapid development was not enough. The means of communication was insufficient as there were transportation, restaurants, the roads, railways, and postal facilities were not enough to reach all the corners of the country, which essentially did not allow the newspapers to reach their desired destination of penetrating the distances. Now, measures taken for the growth of press. As the first Prime Minister of Free India, Jawaharlal Nehru made several contributions to the growth of Indian press. It has been realized that the press is a part of the social and economic processes, reflecting them and guiding them in its process of growth. One of the major steps that have been taken to support the growth of the press immediately after attaining independence was the formation of the Press Commission. Another was the formation of the Small Newspapers Inquiry Committee, which submitted its report in 1966, Changes and the Becoming of the Print Media as an Industry. One significant change that was seen in the print media during the post-independent India against the pre-independent period was that during the pre-independence period, the big businessmen of Indian origin hardly invested in the newspaper business. However, in the post independence period, these people started investing in it hugely. As it was observed by Robin Jeffrey, the immediate post independence period faced newspapers industry divided into three major categories. Number one category was fast disappearing British owned English language newspapers. Number two category was Indian owned newspapers which had been in the hands of nationalist sympathizers before independence, and number 3 was newspapers that were acquired by Indian capitalists after independence. Now, the role of press in independent India. The first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, was of the view that media must grow, but the quality of it must be high, and additionally, they must have a sense of social responsibility. He had also advocated for the diffusion of its ownership. The role that media played during the immediate period of independent India was of nation building. The important role that media played after the independence of the country from the colonial authority was of nation building tasks. The role of press media in independent India is very different than of the pre-independence period, as they were expected to play a constructive role in nation building rather than earlier critical crusader or agitated role. The criticisms of the newly found state was considered improper. Instead, they have been tasked with playing a positive role in a newly democratized country. Number two was educating the masses. The Indian press had the responsibility of educating the masses on the functioning of democratic institutions, making the people aware of the intricacies of the functioning of the administrative, legal, and other departments of the government. Another was emphasis on economic news. As the government executed the planned economy, which was the first 5-year plans was initiated in 1951 onwards, the volume of economic news that the newspapers carried multiplied. The press stressed the importance of economic progress, which was the need of the time. Next was national integration. The content of the national integration had been a major issue in media, as it was important for the nation building process. The unity and participation of all sections of people from all the corners of the country for the development and progress of the country were emphasized by the newspapers on their issues.